voluntarily returned the documents and cooperated with the investigation. Ken Delaney is NBC's Justice and Intelligence correspondent. Ken, what does the report find?
Lester, Special Counsel Robert Hur found that President Biden did willfully retain and disclose classified information, which is a crime, but ultimately decided that criminal charges are not warranted in this case. And he said that that would be true despite the Justice Department's policy that a sitting president can't be charged. In other words, even if that policy wasn't in place, Mr. Hur would have recommended no criminal charges against the former president. Nonetheless, there are some significant findings in here, the most alarming of which is that the special counsel found that then Vice President Biden discussed finding classified documents at a home he was using in Virginia in 2017 in a recording with a ghostwriter who was working on his memoir. And the special counsel concluded that those were likely the same documents that the FBI found in Mr. Biden's home in Delaware in 2022. And that was a significant fact, an incriminating fact. But the special counsel also found that Mr. Biden may well have forgotten about that incident and that it would be, in any case, very difficult to prove a criminal case. And I just want to read you a very telling passage. Mr. Hur's team wrote, "We've also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview with him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory." And he said that based on our direct interactions and observations of him, he is someone for whom many jurors will want to identify reasonable doubt. So in other words, they found that while Mr. Biden did willfully retain this classified information, it's unlikely they could win a conviction, and it wouldn't even be in the interest of justice. And I should say, Lester, that this report makes a point of distinguishing this Biden case from the Trump case. It says that, you know, its role is not to evaluate the prosecution of Mr. Trump, but based on the plain facts, there are several distinguishing features, namely that Mr. Trump refused to hand over classified documents that were requested, and he's accused of obstructing justice by ordering subordinates to destroy evidence and then lie about it. So Rob Hur, a special counsel who is a longtime Republican appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland, saying there's a clear distinction between the conduct of President Biden and the conduct of Mr. Trump. The other significant thing I want to communicate to you is that the main classified documents that Mr. Biden apparently withheld and kept at his home had to do with his role in the debate over surging troops to Afghanistan during the Obama administration back in 2009. If you recall, Mr. Biden was one of the few voices arguing against sending more troops to Afghanistan. And the report says he wanted to preserve the record of his arguments, except that those were highly classified at some of the highest levels of the government. And so he kept those documents. The report says he also kept a series of notebooks that mingled personal, everyday, diary-like observations with highly classified material. And the report makes clear that these actions, in the view of the special counsel, presented a serious risk to national security. But, Lester, ultimately, they said it did not rise to the level of a criminal prosecution.
All right, Ken Delaney, and thanks. And by the way, we were showing you some of the photos provided in this report of the areas where these documents were found in the then Vice President's home, the President's home in Delaware. Also, some were found in offices. I want to bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas. Danny, it seems like special counsel tried to rebut criticism that this should be handled in the same way that the charges against Donald Trump were.
What's surprising is that the report appears to conclude that there may have been a crime, but instead of concluding that there was or was no crime, that the crime might not be prosecutable or that they were not likely to win. It's a very surprising conclusion, and probably the most surprising part of it can be boiled down to one word, and that word is willfulness. That is key here, because when it comes to document retention, classified document retention, the key word is willfulness. Was it done inadvertently, or was it done willfully, intentionally? And shockingly, the report appears to conclude that President Biden did retain those documents willfully, and then goes on to conclude that a prosecution would not be successful for other reasons. And you talk about the distinction between the Trump case and the Biden case made in the report. And what's very interesting is that Hur points out what we've all known for some time, is that the difference is that Biden came clean right away. Go look at whatever you want. I'm not objecting. Take a look in anywhere you want. And that's exactly what the government did. Trump, on the other hand, allegedly did the exact opposite. So in this case, what is normally in a criminal prosecution a mitigating factor, in this case appears to have exonerated Biden, whereas normally prosecutors might consider someone coming clean as a piece of mitigation. Here, it's a major factor in not bringing a prosecution. And the reason appears to be, at this point, not because they didn't believe there was a crime, but because they don't believe they would be successful.
All right, Danny, thank you. I'll ask you to stand by. Let me bring in Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, the administration has been bracing for this. They've got to be happy there's no criminal charges here, but some of the language that Ken Delaney had walked through in that report has got to be troubling for them.
Lester, I think you're exactly right. There are two ways to view this 379-page report that concludes what has been a more than year-long investigation by the special counsel, Robert Hur. Again, he is a former U.S. attorney from the state of Maryland who worked under the Trump administration. That was done strategically, in effect, by the attorney general in a way to sort of make sure that this was isolated from any claims of politicization, the accusation that it would have been a Biden Justice Department that was responsible for it. We've already heard some of that criticism coming from former President Donald Trump and from some Republicans here. We do have the first opportunity perhaps to hear from the president. He's going to be departing the White House to meet with congressional Republicans in just a couple of moments. If he speaks, we will share that with you. We do know the White House earlier this week was given the opportunity, the White House counsel's office, the attorneys here at the White House and the president's personal lawyers, the chance to review these documents, the 379 pages of this report. We learned only a few hours ago that the White House would not be asserting any executive privilege claims. That basically means, in an effort to be transparent here, they said they were open to all of the report in its entirety being shared. But Lester, as you noted, is some of the details within that report that I think you can anticipate some of the real criticism coming of this president. Importantly for the White House, he is not being accused or effectively accused of any crimes here. As they say, it does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But there's one phrase I think you're going to hear often going forward, and these are the words used by the special counsel, Robert Hur, in this report. He said, among other things, that the President Biden, cast himself, in effect, as an elderly man with a poor memory, who Hur said would be sympathetic to a jury. Obviously, in the realm of politics right now, as we look ahead to what's more and more likely to be a rematch between former President Trump and Joe Biden, the issue of the president's mental capabilities and his age has clearly come up repeatedly. It's been a point of criticism, of attack for Republicans, including the former president, from the very start here. And I think that's something that they're certain to sort of try to hone in on. It is important also to note, Lester, that within this document, within this 379-page report, Robert Hur does the work for some Americans, differentiating between the circumstances in Joe Biden's handling of classified documents, noting that just a day after his personal lawyers first found some of those documents in an office, the Biden Penn Center here in Washington, D.C., an office he used between his time as vice president and president. It was only a day that passed before that evidence was handed over to the National Archives, those who are in charge of any classified documents. Compare that to the circumstances with the former President Donald Trump, who repeatedly, as you know, did very much the opposite. He didn't immediately turn over all the documents. Finally, when he turned over some documents, he only turned over some of those documents, having repeatedly resisted requests from the National Archives. And of course, he failed to fully respond to a subpoena before the FBI ultimately executed a search warrant at his Mar-a-Lago property. Similarly, President Biden allowed the FBI onto his property to do the searches for themselves. One of the key differences in the way these two circumstances were handled. Lester.
All right, Peter, thank you. Let me bring in Kristen Welker, moderator of Meet the Press. She joins me now. Kristen, we've talked with Danny a moment ago about the legal distinctions between this document case and the Trump document case. But will those distinctions matter in the wild, wild world of presidential politics?
Well, Lester, it's a great question, and it may just be that this issue of handling classified documents gets neutralized. What we are seeing today is that President Biden has been legally cleared of any crime, but politically speaking, he's not cleared. And that is going to be a challenge. Republicans are going to capitalize on the language in this report. As Peter just mentioned, calling him an elderly man with a poor memory, that is incredibly harsh language. That is something that could stick. Will this be neutralized? That's one of the questions we will be watching for. But Lester, I'm having flashbacks to 2016 when Hillary Clinton, then FBI Director James Comey, essentially cleared her legally of mishandling classified documents, but again, politically didn't let her off the hook. That became a political firestorm in her campaign. You could argue it's one of the reasons why she did not win the 2016 election. So how will this play out now? Again, you could see a neutralizing effect, even though there are massive differences between how President Biden and former President Trump handled classified documents. Could this all just neutralize in the minds of voters? We'll have to see. One of the things I'm watching for, Lester, how does President Biden decide to respond? Does he get ahead of the narrative? Does he decide to define how the public views this? If he does, that could potentially be a powerful way of dealing with it if you talk to Democrats. If he doesn't, it could compound his challenges. We'll have to see, Lester. A lot unknown as we continue to
All right, thank you. Just a few seconds here. Danny, very quickly, the trial for the Trump trial for classified document issues, that's been pushed down the road.
It is. Like many of these criminal cases, it has been pushed down the road, and it will continue to be, as will the others, simply because with the complexity involved, it was totally expected that these would be cases that would be pushed down, and we can expect it might even happen again.
All right, Danny Savalas, thank you. That concludes the NBC News Special Report. We have more coverage ahead on our streaming channel, NBC News Now, and online at NBCnews.com. I'll see you with more on NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day.